Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged and honored to welcome a very, very accomplished individual from the Netherlands, Mr. Alexander Rinnooy Kan. Alexander, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Alexander is a member of the Dutch Senate. He is the chairman of Netherlands Social and Economic Council. He is a board member of the ING Group Executive Board. He is an emeritus professor at the University of Amsterdam. So before I get into any other questions, Alexander, I wanted to ask you, how do you move between academics and boardrooms? And you also have a political role. I'd love to understand how you do it and what are some of your learnings and challenges?
That's a big question. But let me first of all say I'm delighted to contribute to this event, especially because it links me back to India, a country that I spent a lot of time in, primarily in my role as ING board member. I was responsible for our business in India for a number of years. So I visited frequently, and it's been an overwhelming experience for me. One that I would hope to recover at some point, but that I recall very fondly. So it's in a sense a double pleasure to be here with you.
Wonderful, thank you.
My career has been varied. Many people have asked questions like yours, especially students who are interested in having a similar experience in their own life. And unfortunately for them, perhaps the honest answer is that to some extent you have to be lucky. You have to be lucky to be in a position to be asked to fulfill roles that you would not be expecting yourself to fulfill. So the best advice, in a sense, that I have is when these experiences open up themselves and these possibilities emerge, the one lesson that I would have to share with people with that kind of ambition is simply not to be too afraid. To do something that you would never have expected yourself to be doing, but that apparently somebody else thinks you're able to do well.
Amazing.
So there are moments in your life and you have to rely on the good judgment and the fair assessment of people who request you to do this and to play these roles, as surprised as you may be. And I was surprised several times in my life by these possibilities when they all of a sudden emerged and became realities. Perhaps most significantly so when I was in academia, being the rector of the University of Rotterdam at the time, and was asked whether I would be interested to succeed the then president of the Dutch Employers Federation and take his role. And that in the Netherlands, as possibly in India as well, is quite a broad role, also with political overtones.
Correct.
Essentially, you are expected to be the chief lobbyist for the business community in the Netherlands. And in our political constellation, that is a role that is significant in that there is a tradition of broad compromise and consensus here, typically always involving employers and trade unions, with the expectation that they will find possibilities to agree on topics of, let's say, social economic policy. And that being the case, I was completely taken by surprise when I was offered this opportunity. I was 39 years at the time, young enough to think about alternative things to do, but nevertheless not expecting this. And I still, to this day, have been unable to find out precisely why I was asked to do this. But the principle that I just explained applies very strongly here. I said to myself that there must be good reasons for the relatively smart and experienced people who asked me to ask me. And so I took a deep breath and said, let's give it a try. And if nothing works or if everything fails, there will be other things for me to do. And as I was lucky, I guess also, it worked out pretty well. And so from one thing came another. And at the end of the day, I was very happy to repay my debt to the political party that I'd been a member of for many, many years without really doing anything much for them directly. And I was very, very honored and pleased to be a member of the Dutch Senate for 4 years. That is now also a thing of the past, but it makes for a very balanced whole. And again, I consider myself very, very fortunate. After a while, as I'm sure you will have found out, the total of your experience, the sum of your experiences add up and somehow makes the whole a bit more than the sum of those parts. So you can really contribute in ways that people who have a, let's say, a one-track career in a specific part of society are not easily able to do. So again, I was happy to contribute in that way. I can recommend it to anybody. And the one recommendation then again would be never be afraid to take this kind of a jump. Rely on the people who ask you and just do your best and hope for the best.
Incredible, incredible. I mean, what I'm sensing, Alexander, in everything you've said is a lot of gratitude and a lot of modesty. I mean, you've run such large organizations, but thank you for sharing so much about this. But, you decided to take a career in academia. You led ING in banking in India. You led the Netherlands Social and Economic Council. You were a member of the Dutch Senate. How did you juggle so many different roles?
Well, that I think is maybe a personal trait that many of your viewers may recognize. It begins with curiosity.
Okay.
Really significant curiosity and eagerness to find out, especially find out more about parts of the world you know next to nothing about. And then, of course, a willingness to take the time to do it and to spend appropriate energy on actually exploring these unknown parts in depth. And that, of course, is a time-consuming affair.
Correct.
So I think I can fairly say that I have worked very, very hard. And if there's anything that I worry about is the extent to which it has taken time away from my family, from my wife and children. They tell me it was bad but bearable. But nevertheless, it is a concern that I think also many of your viewers may recognize. To get that balance right is an extra challenge. But if you manage it and set aside enough time for them and at the same time spend your time well, then it can be done. And of course, there's this wonderful saying, if you want anything done, ask a busy person. I think that really applies to many people. Somehow or other, you can spend your time very effectively if you learn quickly, if you read quickly. That is one of the other things I think is a small thing, but a significant thing. I started reading when I was very, very young, about 4 years old. And as a result, by the time I became sort of 20, I could read not just a lot, but I also could read extremely fast. And if there's anything that has helped me in all the roles that you mentioned, is an ability to digest long texts very, very quickly. So that is another recommendation to anybody aspiring this kind of career. Just learn to read very, very, very quickly. At the expense, I might add, when I now am in a period of my life that I find myself in, that reading poetry and very complex novels becomes a double challenge because it simply cannot be done quickly. But anything else, I think, can be read quickly and should be read quickly. And then, of course, your day expands and you can do basically what you refer to.
What amazing advice, Alexander, that you've just given. I'm sure all of our viewers and listeners will lap it all up. But, let's move to academia, which you chose as a career. You taught in Europe, you taught in the US. Tell me a little bit about what you were teaching and how is academics or academia evolving over the last 30, 40 years? I mean, you and I are of a similar vintage.
Well, I'm happy to talk about this. It's if anything, one of the ongoing threads through my life. And it all started in a rather peculiar manner. For a long time, I thought I would go and study history when I was in secondary school. And then when I was 16 years old, something happened to me that also happened to many other people. I got exposed to a teacher who changed my life.
Okay.
And in this particular case, it was the mathematics teacher.
Okay.
A very, very remarkable man, not necessarily very friendly or very kind, but extremely good at what he did. And what he did is what a good teacher should always do, to tell students, pupils who are really interested, a little bit more than they really need to know. Just open the door to what there is away from the required material and give them a glimpse of the discipline, the science, as it presents itself to experienced participants. And so that is what he did. And it really got me going. So I changed my mind right away and studied mathematics. And I've never regretted it ever since. But what happened to me in that role was really another example of how luck intervenes and how coincidences happen in your life. I was offered at the end of my studies a PhD position in the Netherlands in pure mathematics, algebraic geometry.
Right.
Where, by the way, to one of some of the great leaders, some of the great researchers are Indian. So Abhyankar is a name that I especially remember. And in fact, I met him once, very remarkable man. So that's what I did. But then when I finished my studies and the documents for my appointment in that particular role were sent to the Ministry of Education, just one day later, the Minister of Education, the then Minister of Education, called for a total job freeze for all the Dutch universities, retroactively for 1 week, starting for an indefinite period. And so as a result, this particular appointment fell precisely in that interval. If I had finished my studies a week earlier, I would have had a very different life, I'm sure. If I had finished a week later, it probably would have found a way around it. But because I finished when I did, there was no escape. I just could not pick up this particular job. And so I had to move. And I moved in the direction of applied mathematics and econometrics. And that, in a sense, was also a very good choice. I enjoyed it very much, but it also took me closer to the real world than algebraic geometry would have done. And so as a result, because I also, again, was a bit lucky, I ran into a topic, an area that was under development. I was there to pick the sort of the low-hanging fruit. I became a professor at a fairly young age, and then the rector of the university that I served at, and my career got going. But I think I think that is really the right word, my love of the university as a place of learning, as a place of the development and the transmission of knowledge has never disappeared, and it's still there. And there are a few pleasures as significant to me as the pleasure of sharing knowledge that you have with eager students, smart students, see them grow and develop, see them develop ideas that are way beyond your own. See how they can basically build their own position, take their own role, and contribute to that enormously broad and universal tradition that is now that university now stands for. In your country, of course, where I visited, among other places, the Indian Statistical Institute, a world famous institute with people that I admired enormously. But of course, also in the United States, it is just a very, very happy tradition. Humanity, in a sense, I think, at its finest.
Amazing. Every time I meet someone who's an expert in econometrics, I'm actually in awe of them. Because when I was doing econometrics in my MBA class, that was the only subject I couldn't understand at all. But thank you.
I have a theory about that, because this is what I hear a lot. People say mathematics is not for me. And really my thesis, if you will, is that it truly depends on the teacher you have. Because what your experience has been, to some extent, has been my experience at the other end. My first serious job was to teach mathematics in a business school. And especially my role was to work with people with a legal background or with a literary background, anything but the sciences, and bring them to some extent up to standards so that they could participate in the technical classes, the math classes, the economic classes. This was a big challenge, but frankly, I really think I did it after a while. They came back to me later, many years, sometimes later, and said that they still remember it with some fondness, which is not the case with mathematics classes for everybody. And I really, really, really believe that if you take the time and develop the right approach, then mathematics can be taught successfully to people who think they have no talent whatsoever.
I'm sure. But Alexander, now let's talk a little bit about the Netherlands Social and Economic Council. Tell me a little bit about the role of this organization in the Netherlands.
That's one of my pet topics. And I'm happy to do that because it really is a tradition that I am proud of and that has a very, very long history. So very briefly, this story really starts in the Middle Ages, believe it or not. In the Middle Ages, Europe was the domain of a very fierce power struggle between two parties. One you can think of as the feudal lords on one hand, and the other the emerging cities, the seats, if you will, of worldly power and economic power. And in most parts of Europe, one of the two, at the end of the day, if you will, won the battle. And you can still see the signs of that today. But in the Netherlands, or I should say in the Low Countries, because the Netherlands really did not exist for purely coincidental reasons, there was a balance of power that held. These two parties were about equally strong. And they also realized after a while, not only that they could not beat the other one, but that they could really need the other one. Because, of course, the cities needed protection, and the feudal lords, if you will, needed money. And so rather than continue to fight, they realized they might as well cooperate, which they did. And which a few centuries later led to what people still think of as the golden age of the Netherlands, the 17th and 18th century, when the Netherlands blossomed and for a while became the most prosperous country in the world, amazingly powerful for such a short nation, with its fleets just swarming all over the world, including India, of course, but all the way to the Far East. And then yet another a few centuries later, when the great industrial developments occurred, and when employers and trade unions realized they had opposing interests and nevertheless were more or less forced to work with each other, capital and labor, again, rather than having a long power struggle, the Dutch, in this Dutch tradition, realized they might as well work together. And that was especially true after the Second World War, when the country was damaged and had to be rebuilt. So again, there was immediately a willingness to set aside traditional differences and just collaborate. And that spirit of collaboration, the spirit of compromise, is still there today. Still, when the government wants to make a major decision in the social economic domain, it will call upon the Social Economic Council, which unites employers and trade unions, and come up with an advice. And that advice, to be effective, has to be an advice that both parties are happy with. And so it typically is always a compromise where parties give and take over time, rely on each other to keep their promises, to live by their word. And of course, as long as that continues, there is a continuity there that I like very, very much. So the Social Economic Council is really the body of the advisory body that takes responsibility for that unanimity, for that compromise. And I'm very happy to say that it is still alive and kicking today, and adapting its role, adapting its methods, adapting the subject that it discusses, now including broad topics like healthcare or the climate challenge, but still working, I think, in that spirit of compromise that has worked extremely well for the country as a whole.
Amazing. So, Alexander, I'm going to move to a few questions for you personally. my viewers and listeners love to get to know my guest a little better. So my first question to you is, in a life so well lived with so many achievements, what would you say are three key milestones or pivot points? And I think I know the first one, when you met your professor at 16, but I'd
Yes.
love to hear it from you.
Well, if you think about changes in your life that you will never forget, opportunities, then the first one is the one you already referred to, that I already talked about. I think it's fair to say that the second one would be my opportunity to switch from academia to a business/political role, because it was so totally unexpected and at the same time so extremely challenging, and with potential, I think, to really contribute significantly. And I think the third one has to be the moment that our first child was born.
Okay.
And that is not very original, I'm sure, but at the same time, it simply has to be there in the list of three. It was an amazing moment with an amazing follow-up now that our grandchildren are, I don't know what phase of life you are in, but we are now having and enjoying 4 grandchildren. I think there is a sense of continuity there that extends way beyond anything any business career could ever do for me.
Amazing. Well, I'm at a stage where I'm hoping to get our first grandchild soon. So
good. I'm sure
we're getting
you
there.
will love it.
I'm
It is
getting
a
there.
great experience.
So a few more questions. As you look back at life, what does success mean to Alexander?
You already said that you detected a sense of gratitude, and that I think is very strongly here. I feel enormously privileged for having lived where I live, in this peaceful and civilized country, for having been spared the terrors of war, which of course my father and mother both suffered through, for having opportunities to grow intellectually without fears. The 4 lacks of fear that Franklin Roosevelt talked about are alive and visible here for everybody to enjoy. So gratitude, I think, is the first sense that I have. And if there is an ability that I would hope will continue to be part of our national culture, if not the global culture that we're all part of, it is probably an ability to empathize, to view the world not just through your own eyes and from your own interest, but to have the willingness and the ability to put yourself in somebody else's position, to see the world as a whole or parts of it through his or her eyes, and to appreciate why that perspective makes sense and has value to that individual, and see if there is a way in which you can perhaps jointly pursue something that will be of joint benefit to both of you.
Amazing, amazing. And my last question to you, Alexander, which is, for someone who has done so many different things, and you know, as I'm talking to you, I keep sensing the excitement of everything that you've done and everything you probably will do in the future. Who or what inspires you?
That is a difficult question. And I'll tell you why it's a difficult question. One of the, if you will, frustrations of my life, and not a very nasty one, but a real one, is that I have never really been able to find a proper place or role for anything resembling religious sentiments.
Okay.
It's hard to live a life like you and I do without metaphysics being part of it. You simply do not want to accept that there is no more to life than what you see and feel. And at the same time, to properly give it the role that it deserves is, at least for me, has been very, very difficult. I think no person that I can think of can live that kind of life without having moments that something resonates that is not fully accountable for fully comprehensible within the rational and logical worldview that you've been trained in. And yet to give it a proper position and a proper name even has been very, very hard for me. So what I'm hoping is that going forward, now that I have more time than I had, I can detect perhaps identify some of the features of this metaphysical component and make them more tangible and manageable than they've been so far. But I'm well aware of the fact that it will be a challenge that I may not be unable to meet fully, but that I'm looking forward to nonetheless.
Oh, nice. Alexander, on that note, I just want to thank you for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me at such great length of your incredible thoughts on academia, on mathematics, on econometrics, on your political role, on your role with the Netherlands Social and Economic Council, and some of your deeper thoughts as well about you personally. Thank you again and good luck.
My pleasure. Good luck with your program.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.